to the cloud because it's still letting me do that today. We also had a change in our Zoom license, so there's a lot new today, and I'm trying to figure out what's still working. So anyway, here we go. We're about to get started. So again, thank you all for coming. And if you joined me a little bit later this afternoon when I said this training is focusing on really the design of instruction to maximize learning for our learners while they are in this distance learning situation. And it is not focused on teaching anyone how to use any specific technology. It's more about the design of instruction and the instructional sequence. It is a new training, it's a new session, so we will be recording this session and it will be available in the Distance Learning Hub. So if you can't stay, that's quite all right. I have put a link in the chat to the presentation. You'll notice it is not a Google Slides deck and it is not a Google Doc. It is not a Google product at all. And that was also to model for you one other type of tool that people can use when they are designing their learning. And those choices of tools really do come from really looking at the features of a tool and being selective and strategic about why we're using it and what it provides that's different, perhaps than having used a different tool or a tool that you're already familiar with. All right, so I'm going to get us started here. Close out my video. Okay, so we're going to get started with this. All right. So as I said, we're going to look at lesson design for distance learning, and this presentation is broken up into kind of 4 parts. They're not necessarily equal-sized parts, but it is broken into 4 parts. The first thing we'll talk about is community in our distance learning spaces that we're doing in our digital spaces. Then we'll look at some facets of the design of the actual instructional components of our lessons when we're actually presenting new content to our learners. Often in a video form or something they can access at any time, not necessarily dependent on being able to join us live in a Zoom session, for example. Then we'll talk a little bit about practice opportunities for our learners, and then we'll end with assessment. So that's kind of where we're headed today for this particular session. So as I said, we're going to start with the idea of building community in digital spaces, and kind of some features of that, but also some of what's most important about that. And do feel free to put questions in the chat or participate in the chat as we go. And as I said, there will be a couple of points where I might be asking you, in fact, they're coming up pretty soon here, where I might be asking you to try a couple of different tools. So you might also want to be ready to hop into Chrome just a little bit to try those out with me so you can see them in real time. Something that as teachers we've always known, and that we really work hard on as we are welcoming our classes to us at the beginning of the year and so on, is that sense of building a learning community in our classes and building a community that fosters trust and respect for everybody in the room, and that really is engaged in everyone in the room being interested and invested in everyone else's achievement and comfort and ability to work with the content and so on. And I think when we had to make this shift to distance learning so fast, teachers remained incredibly concerned about fostering and building community, and it's been wonderful. There's so much more to say on this topic, and we're only going to get a very small little chunk here today. There are a lot of really amazing things teachers are doing to make sure that students still feel like they are part of a community, and also like that community has norms, has kind of an agreed set of behaviors for how we're going to interact in these spaces. I realized I need to add that in as an actual point that's listed here, but at least we'll say it out loud. For how we're going to engage with each other. If students have opportunities to type in a forum where the other students in the class can read what they're typing, you know, what are some norms for that and for what will be accepted? If they're going to be in live Zoom meetings, which are not required, but so many teachers are doing, if they're going to be in live Zoom meetings, what are some things we've agreed upon as a community that we're going to do to make sure that everyone is lifted up and everyone is a valued member of that community and everyone contributes with their own best heart, best intentions, and in a way that is respectful to everyone in that room. So when we came into this distance learning situation, it was pretty upending, and it was difficult because it almost felt like we didn't have the time that we would normally take at the beginning of a school year, for example, to help build that community and help learners be part of building the community and help them understand where we would be and how we would interact. And then there were cases where teachers found themselves having to kind of reel things back because we just moved so quickly out of necessity. So we all know that learning starts with community. And we can engage students in a variety of ways in just simple kind of asking questions from that social emotional perspective to kind of learn where they're at, how they're doing, what's helping them at this moment, and what's holding them back or hindering them or causing them challenges at this moment. And I know that for some teachers, it seems really important to, it feels like we're losing time, and it feels like there's no way we're going to do everything that we did in a normal school year. And frankly, that's probably true. But it's critical to make sure that we take the time that it takes to check in with our learners. And I've been really impressed with some of the ways teachers are doing that. Like we're going to talk about a couple of tools in a minute that can be used, but some teachers are doing things, where they're kind of checking in with their learners in a variety of types of Zoom meetings, having a student of the week type of product where just each week when they do have their live session, or each week in their Google Classroom or via messages that they're using with Seesaw or Remind, they're sharing out and making sure every student feels connected and valued, because every student is getting a chance to be heard through those programs. So asking how they are, finding out what is something they're appreciating right now, given how different this situation is, finding out what aspects of school seem easier. There might be some that for some of our learners, they're like, oh my gosh, this is actually easier to me now than I think it was. This part of schooling and education is easier for me. What is something new that they have done that they hadn't done before this happened? What's been challenging for them? And when we ask that question, we do have to be ready for a wide variety of answers that might cause us to have to stop and think as well. And then make sure we invite in their questions. So we have a lot that we can do to just really bring them in, make sure we're checking on them and on how they're doing, and even gathering their questions. But we might need some support with some tools to do that. And I kind of broke this section up into two different kinds of tools. So the first kind we'll look at is our tools that connect students with each other, usually in real time, but not always, so that they can see or hear each other's responses and they can respond as well, kind of in real time. So Zoom is obviously one of those, and teachers have already been using that, and they've been great, like playing live games with students, having students do scavenger hunts, as well as doing some of the social emotional check-ins, doing exercise moments when we were all together in the Zoom room, and so on. There's just been a lot of great things happening in those times that you've dedicated and set aside as, okay, these are the times we're going to try to come together all at the same time in the same place. And we know that that's hard right now. And the work that you're doing in these Zoom rooms is really awesome. Another way you could do it, if you are using Google Classroom, you could actually use the question feature, which is part of classwork, in order to help do those check-ins. If you set up the question feature so that students can see each other's replies and reply to each other, then you're actually giving students an opportunity to either ask a question or share something they're feeling, or share something new they did this week, or just share something that they want to share, and see each other's comments and reply to them without even being on camera or anything. The question and the thing to consider there is just when you set up that question, it's a type of assignment in Google Classroom actually. So if you haven't tried it before, it's actually on the class work page. And when you click create, question is one of them. Is just to be sure that going back to those norms, that there is a clear understanding of what kinds of things will be permissible in that situation, since everything the students type or say, can be seen right away by the other learners once they hit submit. And once those other learners have also submitted a response, and there's not really a chance for you to moderate first. We know that for some of our learners, that's a bit challenging. If you do run across a learner who's having difficulty with those kinds of access and permissions and having trouble making good choices, Google Classroom does have a feature where you can mute individual students and work with them individually until they are ready to kind of join back into those group activities in a community forum online, and do so responsibly and nicely. So another type of tool where you could do this is a tool called Padlet. So I'm going to grab the link to this and I'm going to put it in the chat for you, and then I'll talk you through how to get there, because I've taken over your screens with my Zoom room, and you can see that this is a nice blank slate for you right now. So I'm going to put this link in the chat. Give me 1 second to get that open for you. And when you get there, you'll actually be able to, when you get there and you copy the link out of the chat and then go into Chrome or Safari and open up this link. If you are stuck because you're in a full screen Zoom right now, try hitting escape to see if it comes out of full screen so you can get to the other programs on your computer. If that doesn't work, find the toolbar in Zoom at the bottom where it says participants and sharing and so on. Either right underneath it or above it, it says you are watching Nicole Naditz's screen or viewing Nicole Naditz's screen. To the right of that, it says view options. Click on that, pull it down, and there's an option called exit full screen. That will take you out of full screen. And then if you're on a Mac, you should be able to put your cursor to the bottom of the screen and kind of bring up your other tools, including Chrome browser, so that you can paste, ta-da, someone's here, so that you can paste the link and come on in. And then as someone noticed, you can actually click anywhere to start typing. I've got it set up to where you can post anonymously, but you don't have to allow that. And so it says share 1 or 2 ways that you currently engage students in your distance learning experiences. You can type, you can include photos, you can actually use your microphone and record your response, not the Zoom microphone. But if I click somewhere, for those of you who are still working, if I double click, hold on, Padlet updated elsewhere, update, yes, yes. Let's see if I can do it. Oops, there we go. If I click once and hit the plus, sorry, it's not liking me trying to do it right now because it's my Padlet and I'm sharing my screen. So it's having a little trouble with behaving with me right now. Oh, there's mine. You can type a title. You can then add information beneath the title. But if you click on the 3 dots, you can actually allow students to take a photo, share video, record audio, draw, or do any one of a number of things. And the nice thing is that Padlet can actually be moderated. So if you wanted to, you can actually, in your settings in the Padlet, you can actually set it up to where nobody else can see each other's posts until you as a teacher have a chance to moderate them. There is a language filter, which actually works in a number of languages, but you would probably need to just choose English for most of you, although my language teachers, you would want to choose probably the target language, unless you are doing some check-ins in English just to kind of bring them back in and check on how they're doing. I love the extra explanations that are coming in. Thank you. So this is a tool that we can use in order to do a lot of things. We can actually come back to this tool later, and instead of using it for a check-in for building community, this tool can also be used for a variety of types of practice opportunities with the content that you're teaching, because of the ease with which students can create a variety of kinds of responses. You'll also notice, as you're looking through here, you might notice the hearts and the comment box, which means in the setup of this one, I, as the person setting it up, chose to actually give my users of this Padlet the opportunity to like each other's posts and also to comment on each other's posts. So you can actually do that as well, and you decide if that's what the students can do. K-level students. Well, what I really love for kindergarten level students, for when you're online, and I know often they're still going to need the support of their families, just because they're so new at navigating technology that's not a game, or just viewing things. I really recommend Seesaw. And the nice thing about Seesaw is that you can actually push even something like this out, although you wouldn't probably have them type at the link that we're seeing here. Well, with Seesaw, you don't even need to push this out, but you could. You can also allow them to record themselves, take a picture and submit it. And it's an interface that has almost no words in it. So it's very visual and easy for people to understand. So even if English isn't the first language in the household, a lot of them can tell what to do by looking at the interface. And Beth, I know you've probably seen that already. But, oh, not resources, you said responses. Oh, interesting. responses, you might be able to have them respond also. There's a couple of tools. Let me think a little bit more about this, because there are a couple that might allow for some emoji type responses if you wanted to do that. Drawing responses as well. So this tool has drawing as an option. Seesaw has drawing as an option. I know of a few other tools also that allow for drawing as an option. And then the other one that would work well, especially if you don't want them to get bogged down in having to try to type things when you're just checking in with them, might be to do anything that has any kind of audio or video record as an option, which would include this tool, Padlet, as well as Seesaw, as well as Flipgrid. So as we go through here, we can see, I love the one I saw it a minute ago. There it goes, there it is. The dance parties, which was a routine we had before we left campus. That makes a lot of sense. What are some ways that we can continue the routines that were successful in our brick and mortar classrooms? Is there a way that we can continue those routines and those things about our classrooms that our students valued in this distance learning space? And so this teacher found a way to do that. Oh, thank you for sharing the list. And so there's been, some really nice, the question in Google Classroom for literature circles, Zoom, digital escape rooms. I just love escape rooms in general. I hadn't tried the digital ones yet, but I had done a couple of physical breakouts with my students that I wrote for them, and it was just amazing. And then Zoom meetings and Google Classroom and Hangouts and so on. Having office hours has been really helpful, and there's a lot of teachers doing great read alouds, and you can do that with so many different kinds of tools, whether you're doing it through Seesaw or recording it. Some are recording it in Screencastify, some are just recording it in Zoom and going into Zoom and hitting record because you're familiar with Zoom already, and then you can actually upload that video. If it's short enough, you can put it in your Google Drive and share it that way, but you can also upload straight to YouTube because you all have a YouTube channel associated with your Google account through San Juan Unified. So you can upload your own recordings there if they're on a hard drive somewhere. All right.
About the YouTube, we all have it connected. How?
So essentially what you would do is, if you go to Google, the fastest way in some ways, just to make sure you end up signed in with your San Juan account, especially if you're someone who also has Gmail that you check on the same device, the easiest way would be to go to your Google Drive, and then in the upper right corner, they have that thing they call the waffle, which is your app launcher. If you click on that, go to YouTube. So I'll do it right now for you, actually. If you go up to YouTube, well, you have to find it first. Go into YouTube. And when you go there, you'll see, now this is my personal one, and I can tell because it has the wrong picture. I purposely have different pictures for my two accounts. I highly recommend that if you have a Gmail and a San Juan account, put different pictures on them. When you go here, you just go to your channel. And then, and actually you don't even have to go there. You can click the upload video, and you can upload video as long as it's saved onto the hard drive from your device. Also works with your phone. So if you have video on your phone, you can go to the YouTube app and upload it from there. So there we go. Oh, hold on a second. Let me go back to here. So this Padlet will remain available to you if you want to take a look at it again, if you want to like things, or share some, if you think of an additional idea you'd like to share, or if you'd like to take some time to look at the ideas that were shared here. There's a couple of different ones that are being shared here. So just something for you to keep in mind and look at as we go. So that's one tool, and that's one tool that you can use both as kind of that community building and checking in tool that you can use, but it's also one, as you can see, because of the variety of responses, that when we start talking about practice later, this might be one of the tools that you decide you want to use for practice. Okay. The other one that someone actually already mentioned, and it's gotten pretty well known now, especially as a result of distance learning, that you could use if you wanted to have a way where students can not only share their thoughts and their questions, but also hear what other students' thoughts and questions were and even respond to them. So if you want it to be kind of like that sense of where if we were together in our classes and I asked a question to the class, right? We'd all hear what each other had to say. And so if you're trying to replicate that, in addition to the Zoom meeting, another way to do it is Flipgrid. Difference is that they wouldn't necessarily they wouldn't all be doing it right at the same time. So Zoom, they would be right at the same time. Flipgrid would actually have you create first a grid, and then you create a topic within that grid, and that topic is where the students would then see whatever it was you wanted them to talk about, because you'd give them that in the instructions. Excuse me. And then with their devices, they would be able to use the webcam or phone camera and microphone that they have in order to upload a video response so they can actually see each other and hear each other. And depending on the settings that you put in place for the Flipgrid, most of the time people choose this option because they want students to be able to reply to each other. So you set it up to where they can watch each other's videos and reply with video again, so that they can constantly see and hear each other. Obviously, you can see and hear all of them as well. You can either reply to them in a way that the whole group can see and hear, but you can also leave private feedback for them as well if you would like to just say something to that student individually. So Flipgrid is a video tool. The difference between it and Seesaw is that, generally speaking, Seesaw does not have a way for the students wouldn't reply to each other via video. You can set up Seesaw products where it's such that the students can see each other's videos and like them or comment on them via text. But Seesaw doesn't have like a video commenting feature where the students could reply by video. So that's one way that the two are different. Flipgrid also is not necessarily designed as much to be a place that could be the central like clearinghouse for all of your educational content, but Seesaw actually could be the platform you choose to use, as we'll see later, for your digital classroom, if you're not one who's using Google Classroom, for example. Some teachers do deliver instructional content using Flipgrid, but it's not necessarily designed to be a place where you would like do an instructional video and then provide a link to some practice opportunities. It's not set up that way. It's really all about people using video to either share a question that others are going to respond to, or to respond to prompts or questions that someone else has left. So in this case, it's a really easy, like I set up a really easy way for people to just introduce themselves, just to give people a sense of what it's like. So if you wanted to try it, I would recommend you make sure your Zoom microphone is off. But if you're willing to kind of go out on a limb and you haven't seen this before and you would like to try it, I'll put the link in the chat. If you are on a phone, you would actually need to, I'll put it in the chat too, Flipgrid app. So you may not have time to do that right this second. You might want to use a web browser instead. And then you would put in the ID or topic ID. And I think I set it up to where it doesn't have any passwords or anything. Your student ones should have passwords to protect your students from the public being able to find their videos. But for this one, I didn't set it up with a password. So in the chat, there's a link if you're doing it from a web browser. If you're on a phone, you or students, phone or tablet, they should use the Flipgrid app. You should never use a browser on a phone or a tablet if an app is available, because typically the web browser won't function correctly in the phone or tablet, but the app will. So if you are on a phone or tablet, you would get the Flipgrid app first, and then it would ask you to input a grid code, and this would be the code. The code is always at the end of your link, so it's easy to find. And if you wanted to try it, you would be able to kind of go in and just kind of introduce yourself, or this is an old one, I didn't rewrite it for today, but introduce yourself, keep it to 90 seconds or less, maybe share a favorite activity or something. And these are some previous ones that we had done earlier in the school year. So these are some district teachers actually. As you can see, teachers can choose, you actually do have to put up a photo that goes with it. You can upload any photo. It doesn't actually have to be your face. The idea is that it would be a face, to go with it, but it doesn't have to be that. I used to tell students they could take pictures of their shoes, but they can also add stickers and objects and things to their little thumbnail photo before people listen to it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And I'm not sure yet if anyone's trying to do it right this second. So I'll give you a minute or two in case any of you are trying. When you get there, you just click the plus. And then, you're gonna have to log in. All right, fine. Log in. And we'll see if it works because there we go. And then it says you have 1 minute and 30 seconds because I set this one up as a timed one. So if I wanted to draw on it, add stickers, type on it, add a filter, do it, I can do any of those things, but then I can also hit the record button. Now, because I'm in Zoom right now, a record button isn't going to work particularly well, but you can kind of see how that works. And then once you're done with your recording, you hit the little upload button and that will go to my grid in Flipgrid so that I can take a look at it later. Or so that others can see it, because I've got it set up to where you can see each other's videos immediately. But this also has a moderate feature. So if you need to, you can set it up to where students can't see each other's videos or reply to them until you have a chance to moderate them first. Okay. So I'm just taking a quick look. Okay, doesn't look like anyone's trying it right now, but this is another option. It's kind of similar in the sense that to Padlet and a lot of these other tools, in the sense that it also is not just great for connecting with each other, but it's actually good for practice later. As you get through your lesson and you want to have them practice content, this can be one way that you can have them submit their thinking, their understanding, talking about something they did or a problem they worked out, because they can kind of show it and then talk about it and so on. Another way that you can connect students with each other for community and allow them to see what each other has said or posted and then even interact in some ways with it, and it's a little bit different and it's not as well known at all, is called dot storming. So I'll put this link in the chat as well. This one is not video or audio. So this one would strictly be images, links, or typing. So you can upload photos, but you can't, and you can type, you can paste a link to something else, but you can't audio record or video record. If you have a video saved on another site, you could put a link into that video, but that would be different. So the reason this is called dot storming, if you decide to come in and try it, what you would do is you would either add a card or upload an image. And when you do that, everybody who's in the room can actually not only comment on it by hitting the little comment feature, right? But they can vote for it they can vote for things by clicking on a dot. So as you can see, this one has 1 vote already and it's ready for me to vote for it again. And when I created the board, I decided that everybody had 5 votes. So if there was a lot of content on here, you could vote for 5 different videos, or sorry, not videos, you could vote for 5 different posts, but you can also choose to use all your 5 votes on one person's post, or you could give 3 votes to someone and then 1 vote to someone else and 1 vote to someone else. So this is a way of kind of gathering input from your learners on whatever topic you all are discussing. They share thinking and then they can vote on each other's thinking and they can comment on each other's thinking. So this one, like for Beth, this one wouldn't be as good for a very young class because there's too much tech that they have to manipulate and there's typing, a lot of typing. It's not quite at their level of literacy yet. And it doesn't really have an option for making it easy for our youngest learners to be able to participate in this. But depending on the kinds of conversations you're having, you might find that a tool like this can be an interesting way to get input, and they would be able to, as you can see who the participants are. Someone just joined today. So you can see who they are. There is a chat feature which does not get turned off. So this is also important as you're building community and monitoring your community to know that there's no way to change or to delete what's in the chat. So Maria put Seesaw in the chat. If Maria wanted it to be something that people vote on, what she would do is go up to the top and click where it says add a card. And then that would add a card to the middle here so that other people could see Seesaw. And instead of typing it again, they could just vote for it to indicate that they also use Seesaw to connect and engage with their learners. Thank you. So for example, I use Seesaw. So now I've voted for Seesaw, and other people could vote for it as well, but I could also comment on what she posted. So like I said, in this first section, I was looking at initially tools for building community where students can see and react to each other's comments and whatever it is that they're doing. And notice now I only have 3 votes available because I've used 2 of them so far. Okay, but we're going to move next. And so again, this will just stay up. If you decide you want to try it, you can get in later. We are going to move next to some tools where you can get some input from your learners, but in ways that are either anonymous or private so that they don't have to share in an open forum. Seesaw is definitely one of those ways, especially if you set it up to where students don't see each other's posts. I'm going to take you to Mentimeter now. Hopefully some of you will try this with me. This is great. This has actually a lot of great ways of questions you can ask. We're only going to look at one right now, but okay, let me put this in the chat for you. So if you're able to go there, type one word about how you are feeling right now. Okay, and I put that in the chat. I'm going to move away from here because I have to go to a different site in order to show what you're doing. So hopefully a couple of you will do that. Hold on, I need to, yes, my presentations. That's good because I actually couldn't remember which of my 2 accounts I had used. So I didn't want to have to log in again. Oh, yes, it is this one. So I actually just used this one. So there's already some comments in here, fortunately. Present. Come on. What's going on? There we go. So what it's doing right now is it's showing a word cloud of how people have responded to this question. And as you can see, the word cloud, if you're looking at my Zoom window, is actually changing as people type. If you go back to that link repeatedly, you can just put in more words. The larger words are the words that have been typed the most times. Now, this is just a simple computer program, so if people spell a word differently, it will actually show up twice in the list, not once. So if someone were to spell overwhelmed without the H, it would show up with the H and it would show up as a separate entry without the H. But this can be one way to get input or information from learners about how they're feeling or what they're noticing, what they noticed in a text, but it is anonymous. Okay, so that is one way that you can participate. Another way, by the way, you might be noticing if you're in Zoom with me, you can go to menti.com. It will ask you for a code, 938041. I chose the link in this case because I know that that would be even easier for you if you're sharing via Seesaw, if you're sharing in Google Classroom, you can just put the link in there and it'll take them right to it so that they can participate. Your early learners can do this if you, maybe not necessarily with their feelings and so on, but if you wanted them to practice some of their kind of early reading and writing strategies, and maybe they had a model of like C-T and they could put in, you know, a word that they think, you know, a vowel that they think could complete that, and they, you know, cat and caught and so on. You might be able to see what kind of words come up with some of those things. For your early learners, it wouldn't be so much about their feelings, but I've actually used this both as kind of a feeling and check-in thing with my students, but I've also used it as a practice activity. But I was a language teacher, so we could do a lot with the words in that. Another way to check in with them anonymously is Poll Everywhere, which is just an online, it creates a poll question, or you can create more than one question and they can just answer, but you wouldn't know who was answering. Google Forms, you could, if you set it up to where anyone with the link can do it outside of San Juan Unified School District so that their sign-in is not required, you can actually get input from them anonymously that way. The default is that they can only fill out the form if they're in San Juan Unified, so it does require them to sign in, and therefore it collects their email address so you know who completed it. But if you turned that off so that anybody who has the link to the form can do it, it could be anonymous if you need it to. And then I put in a link for you, which is a resource link for Pear Deck. Their social emotional learning templates are really, really good. So if you wanted to do that, those check-ins would be private unless you chose to share what the student said with the class. So you would be able to collect information from learners and you'd be able to go back into your Pear Deck account and view it without the other students seeing what everybody else said. So that could be a really good way to do that. So we're going to move into that lesson design aspect now that our community is built. And actually, Maria, I know you're really experienced at doing this for me. If you could hop back into the chat and find the Prezi link and post that for our new person who arrived, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And so we're going to talk for the lesson building, the lesson design area about a few key points. Because we have to look at lesson as kind of there's a lot of building blocks we have to put in place in order for this to work effectively. So hold on a second, it's not playing nicely. There we go. One of the things that has happened with this shift is that, as I alluded to before, there's a lot of content, and I know it feels like we're having to leave a lot of it kind of by the wayside for right now. So one of the big adjustments I think almost everyone in this room and throughout our district has probably already made was looking at what was coming up between now and the end of the year and really deciding what were those essential learning targets that if I'm only going to be able to focus on a few more things, these are the things that are going to have the most value for my students going forward if they were to continue this sequence of study, or to really get their understanding to the point where it needs to be for this course or grade level. Sorry, I had an itch in my throat. And then, so the first key to that is actually just selecting those targets and being willing to look at some targets and say, which are the ones that, since I know I can't do it all, I just can't, there's too much and there's a lot to do here with learning the technology and designing the lessons in a whole different way. If I really have to be selective and strategic, which are the learning targets that make the most sense? And in some cases, it might also be learning targets that make sense because they build on previously learned material, so we can harness that and leverage it in order to help them take on this new piece more successfully, as opposed to something that's brand new and maybe doesn't have any kind of prior skill that is readily accessible to build upon. Sorry, it stopped and I don't know why my thing froze. Of course it did. Hold on a second, let me come out of it. We'll just say present again. Yeah, there we go. It's actually a good idea to not design your lesson yet. Once you've identified your learning targets, one of the best things you can do is actually design or find, you don't have to make everything from scratch. There's a lot out there, including in your publisher materials, the tasks that will be used to eventually assess the targets, as well as the rubrics, if appropriate, that would be used to evaluate the students' work on those tasks. You actually want to set that up from the beginning, right after you've identified those learning targets, before you begin designing the lessons, because you want to make sure that everything you design in the lesson is pointing directly at helping them successfully demonstrate those skills or that knowledge when they are assessed. And when we go the opposite way, when we identify our target and then just start building learning things, sometimes we find out, especially if we're, if there was an assessment we were planning to use because it came with the publisher materials, we can actually find out that we've sent ourselves astray. And that our lessons went one way, and then when it's time to assess, we're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that was on the assessment. We didn't practice that. We didn't really build up to that. So if you start with the learning target followed by how that target will be assessed, then you can design in order to ensure that learners have almost no choice but to be successful, because we're going to build a lesson that points them in that direction and gives them what they need. And we're going to build practice activities that allow them to practice, as we'll talk about in a minute, and so on. So then once you've done that, you want to determine the helpful previous knowledge and kind of have that ready or in your mind or in a list, so that when you're ready to design the lesson itself, you know that you're going to want to strategically pull that back into the space. You also want to decide how you'll communicate the learning targets and the path that the students will take to get there. So what I used to do, for example, was I would actually share, if it was the beginning of a unit, I would share all the targets for the unit with my learners, and I would share with them how they were going to be assessed on it and kind of what we were going to be doing between now and the assessment. We're going to have a couple of lessons on this and that. You'll have opportunities to practice both of those, and then you'll be assessed in the following ways. Oh, and by the way, here's the rubric where you will be assessed. Again, older elementary, middle school, high school, so that you know exactly what we're headed towards and how you will be assessed, and what you can actually start gauging your own, as a student, you can kind of keep track and see how you're doing and have a sense of how you're doing before the assessment happens. And so then, because you've done that, you can actually do something to check in with your learners and make sure they understand what the targets are, how they'll be assessed, and kind of what we'll be doing to get there. The target isn't just for me, it's actually for my students. So I want to communicate it. And if I'm going to take the time to communicate it, I want to make sure it's understood. So we want those learning targets to be written and shared in a way that is friendly language for their age, their ranges of experience and expertise. I think a lot of us have kind of come to the realization that it can be difficult to teach new material during a live meeting. Some of it's easier, and there are some subject areas where it would be way better if we could just meet live, like we used to meet in our classrooms. But on the flip side, students don't always have control over whether or not they can join us at the precise moment of our live session, because they may have other students in the household or family members using the devices, something may have come up, and so on. So a lot of us are recording our lessons and then putting them out there for the students to access whenever they next have the device available and the time available. And so because of that, the recordings that we're making become really critical in a number of fronts. And it's not even just the design of the lesson, but some really just other aspects beyond the lesson itself that are important. One of them is this concept of what's called primacy and recency in brain research, and in how the neurons in the brain fire and how they collect and store information in the brain. So what primacy and recency says in research is that people who listen to something, and you've been listening to me for a while now, so you'll get to see this firsthand, often best remember both the first thing that was said or presented, and then the last thing that was said or presented. And everything in the middle just kind of goes by the wayside. It's one reason we all provide recordings of our stuff so that students can review it. I'm providing a recording of this so that you can review it later if you would like to. Because brain research says that the way our brain works, we remember the first thing and remember the last thing, but the stuff in the middle tends to get a little more jumbled up. As a result, we want to keep our videos short, depending on the age, ranging from, in some cases, no more than 5 for younger learners to no more than 15 minutes for older learners. So that means taking a lesson that normally would have been a longer lesson and maybe finding those appropriate chunks to where we can segment it into separate videos so that everything ends up being the first and the last thing that they heard in the video. It will actually improve their retention. So if they have a short chunk of what was a 20-minute lesson, and I can find a way to break it into 2 lessons of approximately 10 minutes, and then provide a little bit of practice and some checks for understanding after each of those chunks, the likelihood of them remembering everything in both of those chunks and being able to use that information is actually increased. And so because of that, in addition to because the slides or the videos need to be really short, or the introduction of new content needs to be really short, you actually have to kind of build your slides in advance in order to support that kind of short design, right? So you want to be really thoughtful and strategic about everything you're putting into your video lessons, why it's there, does it really contribute to what the students need? Is the slide short, concise, easy to understand? Does it directly help my students achieve the target and support them? And so looking at that, we're going to go into kind of some facets of a good recorded lesson. In addition to any words that are on the page, visuals support learners, and they support them to understand the words. And focusing tools that are built into the product that you're using, whether it's Google Slides or PowerPoint or Keynote or even Prezi. So focusing tools include things like using bold or underline to help learners really hone in on what it is you want them to notice during the lesson. Excuse me. As long as none of your students are colorblind, you can also use color. And another focusing tool is annotating, or having shapes kind of appear. So there might be a word there, and then you click, and then a circle appears around the word. If, let's say in the anatomy of a good recorded lesson, I wanted to draw your attention to the word recorded, if I put a shape around it that appears afterwards, that's going to draw your attention to the word recorded. In addition, this sense of that kind of leads into that idea of animation. So as you can see here, if I click, you're not seeing everything that's on this slide until I want you to. That's an important focusing tool that you can use in the design of your recorded lessons or even your live lessons. You can use audio and video to support the printed text and visuals so that you're providing the instruction in all modalities. I think a bunch of you are doing that already. So many teachers are, you're preparing slides, but you don't just give the students the slide deck. You actually then are going into another tool like Zoom or Screencastify, and you're actually recording a little movie of it so that they see the slide and they hear what you wanted to say. One thing that's really interesting, I think everybody's gotten better at this as we've started because it felt just so different and strange and awkward when we first started, but be your true self. You know, you can still have your sense of humor. It's okay if you make a mistake. You don't have to stop everything. You can just correct yourself and move on. If you're I'm a person who uses my hands a lot, go ahead and do that. If you are someone, I tend to do a lot more with words. I'm a little bit bad in this sense because I don't design as well with graphics and images. But if you're someone who really likes graphics and images, don't just get rid of those. Keep using those. Be your true self when you are designing and presenting your lessons. I actually just heard this term today and I really liked it. Some of you might have heard of universal design for learning, and this term reminded me of that. Essentially the idea being that what we want to do is design our lessons in such a way that there is differentiation and support built in for every learner so that we don't have to differentiate as a reaction to them not being able to do the work later. Like we did the lesson, then we tried to practice, and then we found out that, oops, they needed something different from the lesson, and now I need to differentiate and backtrack and redo and create different lessons. If we can build in differentiation from the get-go, in both how we design and deliver our lessons, but also in the practice options we provide, we actually can support all of our learners to be successful themselves from the get-go, as opposed to needing to respond in that way. And the term I heard today, I was actually attending a webinar on assessment, and it was designed for the edges. There's actually apparently a TED Talk on this. It's a TED Talk by someone named Todd Rose, and it's called The End of Average. And basically his theory is that there is no true average learner. You can't define an average learner anymore. There's just too much variation. So trying to design for the average ends up resulting in difficulties when we realize that that didn't hit the mark for all of our learners. And instead we need to design for the edges. So if you think about the edges of your learners, both the highest edge and the edge where students are struggling the most, and you think about what would it take for all of them and all the people in the middle to be successful, is there a way to design for that? Which then goes back to why it's super important to kind of roll back our learning targets, because we're going to go a lot deeper into them. So if we pick really powerful learning targets, they're still going to come out okay next year, because we're going to be strategic about which learning targets we're going to spend and invest this kind of energy on. Please remember too to reactivate prior knowledge if there is something they can use that's going to help them. Then when we are hooking our learners into the lesson, we want to kind of bring back those skills or that vocabulary or that content, that knowledge that they're going to need to be successful with this new target. Is there a quick practice activity they can do to kind of reset their brain schema so that it remembers that prior knowledge, so that when I dive into the new lesson that builds on it, they go, oh, I can totally see how what we're doing now flows directly from that thing I learned back in November. That would be really helpful to them. Another good thing that you can do, if appropriate, is in your model, in your recorded lesson, provide models of what this new skill or vocabulary looks like when it's being used the way the students are going to have to use it or do it. Provide examples. Or as a lot of math teachers I know are particularly good at, provide metacognition. Record yourself talking through how it is you're solving a problem and the thinking that you have as you go through it, and even talking through a misconception that you know is common for learners, and then backtracking and saying, oh wait, I realize why that's not right. Let's backtrack and try this again and clarify and so on. So that sense of kind of being the person as the expert in the content, sharing that internal monologue that guides you in doing the work proficiently so that all of your learners can hear it. Some teachers find that it's beneficial to provide some kind of note-taking guide or schema. I know that's a little bit harder right now because they don't have a way to print it out, but if there is some kind of way, excuse me, that you can provide for them to, even if they're reviewing a video and you want them to fill in a graphic organizer, we can provide those digitally so that they can pause the video and go into the graphic organizer and fill it in as they watch your recorded lesson. And then a really critical piece is to build in checks for understanding, not just checks for understanding themselves, like a question for them to answer, but then a follow-up. The next part of the video tells them what the right answers are and also reveals some of the misconceptions that may have led to incorrect answers, or how a student knows they need to rewatch that segment of the video, or your video tells them, hey, if you had trouble with this, you might rewatch the previous 2 minutes, but you could also check such and such, you know, this resource in Google Classroom or this resource from your textbook, etc., so that they know what to do if they got the check for understanding wrong, and you didn't have to grade anything. It didn't have to come to you. They received a question or two, they tried it, the video told them what the right answers are, or sample right answers and how we got there, and what to do if they got the answers wrong. So I actually kind of covered all of this, but typically checks for understanding are built into your lesson, and they're quick. And they provide immediate feedback for both the student and for the teacher if the teacher is choosing to collect it in some way. So I actually have for you a link to an online matrix of formative assessment tools. These are primarily multiple choice tools, but not all of them. That matrix will help you make good choices between what it is you want your learners to check their understanding on, or even if you want the data, what data you want, and which tools will provide it for you. As I alluded to before, you could use built-in slides with follow-up slides with the answer. So not using any of these tools at all. You could just build it into your slides, or you put a question and it's either open-ended or there's some answer choices. And then your very next slide gives that to them. You could post a question in Google Classroom, and I don't think I put it here, but you could obviously put a thing in Google Forms as well. So if you click on this link, when you open up the slide deck on your own, it will take you to this matrix that actually gives you several features and a little checkbox thing so you know which features each tool includes. The left-hand column gives you help, resources, and the far right-hand column gives you some additional notes about each tool. And there's several tools here that you can use for formative assessments and other kinds of ways of checking in on their learning or helping them practice in a way that is more or less automatically graded depending, or evaluated depending on the tools that you pick. Now, this was designed prior to our embarking on distance learning. So it does include one tool in particular that only works in the classroom, but most of them actually work whether, whether you are in the classroom or not. Okay. So, whew. All right, I have a couple of interesting resources here. Two of them you already know about. One is new, and it's definitely not something to do unless it resonates with you. You should never just try to become some person that you're not. But when you're building this online community, think about your platforms. What platform will best suit the lessons you need to do, and getting the lesson to your students, getting the practice to your students, getting their input, getting their responses. Which platform is going to work best? In our district, we've mainly fallen onto two choices that most teachers are using. Google Classroom, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you use the topics on the classwork page to organize content and resources. The link up here when you open the slide deck will take you to my support document for Google Classroom in case you would like some additional support or to really dive into what it can do. And then Seesaw has a folders option. So you can actually use folders to organize content and resources, and you can actually put things in multiple folders. So you, unlike the topics feature, in Google Classroom, which you can only put a thing in one topic, in Seesaw, you can add things to multiple folders and kind of cross-reference them in that way. And this link will send you to my slide deck that has some support resources to help you with Seesaw. No, it's okay. That's hilarious. It's quite all right. Thank you. I feel like I'm going so fast that I was just like, no, I'm not going any faster. Okay. Some of you have dived into this already. If this resonates with you, you could actually make a virtual classroom. In other words, you could create this space. It's not as scary as it looks. It's just a Google slide with some things that are locked on the background and some things that are clickable, but it's set up to look like a room. And everything in it is interactive. So I forgot to click share audio when I started sharing my screen. So this video, you won't be able to hear it, but essentially, it does involve putting in a Bitmoji of yourself. Again, only if this is your style. This is a thing that goes to click and it takes them to their online reading log resources. This is their Epic reading program. This takes them to a video for the read aloud for that week that they're doing, that the teacher is doing. This is actually later chooses this in the video. You see it becomes the morning message so that when they click on it, it says good morning. When they click on it, it then goes to a video recording of the teacher talking to them. This takes them to, I think, a calendar. The clock takes them to a calendar of their online, what they have coming up this week, when their online meeting is for the week, and so on. And then each of these things is also clickable and takes them to some extra content. Now, again, I'm just talking about platforms, access, organization. If this resonates with you, you might enjoy creating something like this, and you actually then just update. You can change your classroom around too. You can change, like this can become a couch and so on, but you would just update the links, but the template remains the same and they just go in each week and they have all their stuff. Or since it's a Google slide, if you're worried about kids being behind and losing it, you could create a new one for each week in the same slide deck so that they ultimately have all of them. And the video, if you click on the description in the YouTube video, it actually includes templates so you don't have to start from scratch. He actually gives you a few templates with like floors and a couple pieces of furniture that you can use to start. You know, Morgan, I don't know the answer to that question. We do have Microsoft 365. It is available for staff, but right now there hasn't been a lot of conversation about rolling out those tools to students, but it's not out of the picture. It's just that when those conversations were starting to happen, we also then hit the shutdown area and it wasn't the right time to push that many brand new tools out to everybody at once. There's also a classroom type tool that's similar to Google Classroom in Microsoft 365. So we may be seeing that those kinds of things become available to us for students, but I haven't heard much about that yet as to when that will happen. Okay, so now let me hold on a second. I have to escape out of this. So, I also put the link to free templates right here. I think depending on how you want to do this, there's a publish to web feature in Google Slides. When they open this up in Google Slides, it'll look a little bit like this, where you see my main slide in the center and then these thumbnails off to the left. And in order to click on anything, the kids have to click on present, right? But if you, in your Google Slides, if you go to File and then scroll down to Publish to Web, it automatically opens the slides in full screen so that everything is clickable. That's good for things the students don't have to save. It is awful and should not be used if it's a slide deck they need to save into their Google Drive for some reason. But if it's like your virtual classroom and they just need to go there and click on it to access the various things in your classroom, it's great for that. Excuse me. Sorry. A little bit of like allergy troubles right now. Okay, I'm going to click out of that. There we go. So if we've done all this awesome work on our lesson, and we put all this amazing stuff together, one of the areas where things can break down is in making sure students understand how to navigate that online space, and also any instructions that you've put in for activities, which we're going to talk about practice activities next, but any instructions for what they need to do. I mean, when we were in our classrooms, right, we would give instructions, we would repeat the instructions, we'd ask a student to clarify the instructions, we'd let them do the work, and immediately 15 students raise their hand and say they don't know what to do. So that's only gotten exacerbated now that they are not in front of us when they encounter their instructions, right? And so they're viewing their instructions at 11:30 p.m., 9 in the morning, we're not right there. So a few things we can think about or try to do. Be really, really as precise as possible and simple. which is not one of my strengths, by the way. I'm both verbose and not necessarily simple. It's something I'm always working on. Be precise in the task, precise in the purpose, and precise in the instructions. Like, what is the task? Why are we doing it? How do you get there? How do you get it done? But then test your instructions. If possible, have someone else read them and see if they understand, especially a child or someone of the same age. Like, do the instructions make sense? Now, for those of you who teach a language, including ELD teachers whose families may not speak English, they, you know, having someone else read them, it would have to be read with the lens of, if my instructions were always in French, I would actually need someone who is kind of an equivalent level French learner as my students to check my instructions, right? To make sure. So you have to kind of put on that hat of, I am my learner. This is the kind of mindset I bring to instructions. These are kind of the common questions and misconceptions I get, right? So can the instructions be shortened? If so, do so. And can I anticipate the questions? If I was in a classroom in front of my students, can I anticipate the questions that they would ask? And if so, I'm going to try to find a way to answer them now and just put it out there for them. Because as some of us have seen, the students are online whenever. They actually think we're online 24 hours a day. We're not. You should not be. Please don't be. So they'll send texts at like 10:30 at night, and then they like text 3 more times or send messages via Reminder, Google Classroom or whatever. They're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Can you help? Because they just think we're sitting there waiting for their replies or waiting for them to text us so we can reply. So we need to kind of anticipate their questions, because we can't anticipate what time they'll have the question, and we may not be available when they do. So if we are able to anticipate their questions and revise the instructions to answer those questions from the get-go, or provide a model, that's another good thing I should have put here actually, like make sure the instructions include a model, if possible, that can go a long way. And then provide them in multiple ways if you can. Text form, printed, in writing, essentially, not necessarily on paper that they receive, but printed or text in writing. Recorded. Provide a model if appropriate. If there's a way to give a model or an example, we want to do that. And then remind learners with the instructions how they can get help or where they can go to get help. So that if they are stuck, they aren't dependent waiting to determine what time we'll be back online. They have a resource they can go to get help. All right, let me check on my time because I think we're running. Yeah, okay. So I actually can't remember if I listed this as a 1 hour or 90-minute. I think I listed it as 1 hour, so we're running a little bit over. So what I want to share with you is what's kind of the rest, what's left in here, which is we're getting into a little bit of looking at the practice piece of the lesson. And some thinking about multiple choice, because we want to make sure that we randomize. If we are going to use multiple choice, it has a whole bunch of pitfalls. So we want to make sure we randomize the choices. You can use online randomizing tools if there's 4 choices, 5 choices, or whatever, in order to help with that. We research, and myself, I highly recommend not having obviously wrong answers. The reason being is they tell you nothing about why the student got the answer if they still got a wrong answer. So an obviously wrong answer eliminates 1 choice. But if they pick that choice, you've learned nothing about why. There's nothing in there that actually relates to the content, the information, the knowledge, or the skills that's helpful to you in determining what their misunderstanding was, which leads right into my next point. A good distractor or a good wrong answer in any multiple choice, whether it's for practice or for assessment, actually gives you information about the kind of error or misconception the students have so that you can use that information. A lot of the, as you know, a lot of the wrong answers in multiple choice are actually made up of typical mistakes students make. And usually in each case, you can point to this wrong answer came from this particular kind of error in their understanding or in their skills. And that's actually what you want. You want to be able to go with every wrong answer that's there. If a student picks it, you know why that happened and where it came from and how to help them. So then if they're not doing just multiple choice, if they're going to practice in other ways, it becomes a little bit of a challenge. Like, how can we have them practice in these other ways that aren't just multiple choice? Obviously, we'll see some tools in a minute, but whatever you're having them do, you want it to be tied directly to both the learning target and the assessment, as you'll see in a minute. You want them to practice in the same way they will be assessed, so that the assessment isn't just it doesn't feel like something that came out and blindsided them. They should have had a chance to practice in the same ways that they'll be assessed for the various skills, and then get feedback on that. And in that sense, it makes it more authentic, but we also want it to be authentic in the sense that, as much as possible, can we engage students in the kind of thinking, the kinds of discussion, the kind of work that someone who knows this topic would do outside of the classroom. If we can personalize the tasks, it makes them a little less Googleable, so that if they're, sometimes it doesn't work, but if it's possible to find a way to make it something where the student has to kind of put themselves into this work and into the skills that they're using, so that the task is a little personalized to their application of the material, it can make it a little less likely that they'll find help by Googling everything. I am very much in favor of tools that bring in their voices, not just audio, but in writing as well. So their authentic, kind of open-ended explanations, narration, where they're talking through problems. I love tools that actually have an audio record feature, though, for that reason. If we can give students multiple ways, there's a lot of things on choice boards, whether you choose to do that or not, where there's like, here's the lesson, and now here's 3 or 4 or 5 ways for you to practice. Choose 1, choose 2, choose 5, propose another option. If we can do that for learners, to give them kind of multiple ways to attack a new piece of content and kind of work through it, they can choose the way that resonates with them, or for learners who really are interested in the topic, they can explore it in multiple ways. And then, as I said earlier, any practice should really be directly tied to the content on which they will be assessed, and the method, the format, the technology, kind of the what it looks like of how they will be assessed. And I do have a practice matrix. It's not as long as the formative assessment one, but it kind of gives you some options for tools that give you a number of ways to have students practice content. Okay, so I know we do have to wrap up. Sorry, feedback. I guess I should have planned 90 minutes for this one. I will adjust, if you're staying especially, I'll adjust the listing in PL so that it's 90 minutes for you. The feedback should be planned for. How are learners going to get feedback? But don't panic, because it's not all you, and it doesn't have to be, and it should not be all you. But if we're going to have them practice, and if we want that practice to help inform us about whether or not they're ready for assessment, help them know how they're doing, we need to plan for how they're going to get feedback on their practice. It should be timely, but I will be the first to admit that was one of my biggest growth areas as a teacher, because I struggled once things were open-ended and there was 150 of them, I really struggled to give it back as quickly as I wanted. I got better, but I never got to where I wanted. Rubrics can help, and they helped me a lot in this regard. It should be actionable. So it's great to tell learners you did a good job. But they also need to know more specifically what they need to keep doing, do more of, do better, do differently, in order to achieve whatever their logical next step is for them. So feedback that gives them information about where to go from here is going to be much more readily received, looked at, and used. But be strategic about your feedback. It doesn't have to come from you. There are some tools that will allow you to provide some automatic feedback. So a lot of the formative assessment tools, not all of them, but there are tools, Google Forms, Edpuzzle, which is a video tool where you can build questions into videos that they're watching, and others will let you not only set up a multiple choice question and mark the correct answers, but it will also let you tell the students something after they submit their answer that gives them feedback for right answers versus wrong answers. And like, whoa, yeah, sorry you got that wrong. You might want to review such and such in order to clear up that misunderstanding, and so on. So there are some automatic tools you can take advantage of that give learners feedback without you having to type it in all the time. Students can give feedback to each other, particularly older learners. Obviously, if you're doing an open-ended assignment, even the elementary students, when they're first starting to write their first little essays and so on in Google, you can set it up to where they actually share them with a classmate and get feedback. You might want to give them some parameters, maybe ask them some precise questions to look for as they read each other's work and to respond to, or give them the rubric and let them use the rubric if they have a good understanding of the rubric. For older kids, even as early as upper elementary school, there's a fabulous tool called PeerGrade. If you don't have turnitin.com, you can use PeerGrade. And what it will do is students turn in their work into PeerGrade, which is so it's a third-party tool. It's not Google Classroom, so you'd have to go here as well. You'd have to go to this other place, but they turn in their work to PeerGrade, and then PeerGrade automatically redistributes it to students to give feedback to each other. You can decide if it's anonymous or not. You can set up rubrics or questions for them to answer as they read each other's work. And then you can actually set it up for multiple rounds of feedback, revise, send it out, get more feedback, and revise. Students should be engaged in self-assessing, giving them structured opportunities to look at their own work and evaluate it against some kind of criteria or rubric as well. And then lastly, it's your review and feedback, either to the whole class or to individuals. So you might look at a set of work and then say, these are the comments that I'm actually going to give in my next live online lesson, or in my next recorded lesson, or in a message in Google Classroom or Remind. I'm going to put this feedback out for everybody. And then here's only the few students to whom I now need to send some individual feedback in order to support them. And we're at the end. Okay, assessing. So assessment, because we want feedback all along. That's why if feedback didn't come all the way here at the end with the assessment piece, because they need it during the practice phase, right? So that they know and you know that they're ready for this assessment that you planned for from the very beginning when you chose your learning targets. So design your assessments to measure what you want them to measure. Assessments should be focused on the learning targets. They should have been practiced and had an opportunity for feedback along the way. And for that, you might consider open-ended tools when possible, both for the practice and for the assessment. So you can modify tasks usually a little bit so that there's a task where they practice it, and maybe they get 2 or 3 opportunities to practice. Maybe they only get 1. And then with that same tool, they're going to have a task on the same learning target, on the same target, but a differently phrased or proposed task for them to do to show their knowledge. So open-ended tools include Flipgrid, Seesaw, G Suite, Google Slides, Google Docs. Adobe Spark can be a great way also, depending on what you'd like them to do. There is a recording of a training on Adobe Spark on the technology page of the Distance Learning Hub. It was just recorded last week, if you would like to take a look at that. It might have been the week before, actually. And then also for that feedback, a lot of teachers use rubrics. I don't know if you've looked at single-point rubrics. So as a teacher, I've designed rubrics, and I'll come back to the single-point rubric in just a second. But I've designed rubrics, and there is a challenge you run into. So in a second, when we get to the end of this, I'll go back to that single-point rubric topic. The assessment should mean something to the students in terms of kind of why they're doing it. And it should be meaningful in the sense that it looks and feels like everything we've been doing has been leading to this moment. And that their grade is this kind of representation of where they are, or credit, no credit, but the fact that they passed the assessment is a representation of the fact that they have done this work and they've demonstrated what they know and can do on this topic. Whenever possible, it's awesome when an assessment's actually engaging to the learners. I've had a few, not tons, but I've loved it when I've had a few where students, as they were leaving class, were talking about how they really liked the assessment because they learned something while they were doing it. So when readings that are in the assessment give them a chance to learn more or learn something new, and while they're demonstrating their increased reading comprehension, whether it's in ELA or in world languages or ELD, they're also learning about something, so it engages them. Or the tasks are engaging to them because of who they are, and they were picked because, yes, they help us with the learning targets, but there's aspects of the task that also really reflect what I know about my students and who they are and their interests and kind of where they're at mindset-wise in terms of the work. So when you're designing rubrics, or even picking rubrics, there's one of the traps, one of the hardest things about a rubric is no matter how well you design that grid where you have the various kind of criteria on which they'll be graded, and then I'm going to use exceeding, meeting, approaching, not yet approaching standards, and you work so hard to delineate exactly what exceeding looks like for that criteria, and exactly what meeting standard looks like, and exactly what approaching standard looks like, and then exactly what not yet approaching standard looks like. And then you get student work and you look at your rubric and you go, man, these students found a way to complete this task and either exemplify really outstanding knowledge and skills in a way that doesn't show up on the rubric, or make errors that just don't show up on the rubric. I couldn't possibly think of all the ways to be excellent or all the ways to struggle. And now I'm stuck because I can't figure out what to do since the rubric doesn't have a space for the way the student approached the task. So a single point rubric can help with that. A single point rubric actually has you only determine, and I know this is kind of grayed out, but that's the part I wanted to look at, so that's what we're going to look at. Yeah, I like this one. Only determine what it looks like to meet the standard and the ways in which students can excel or miss the mark are actually left blank, so that you can just quickly highlight everything they did that meets and then jot some quick notes on what excelling looked like for that student, in what ways that student struggled to meet the standard. And you don't have to have come up with all the ways the student can exceed or all the ways that the student might struggle. We have a pretty clear understanding usually of what it looks like to meet, and we're pretty good at defining exactly what meeting the various standards for each criterion on the rubric looks like. Right? We know what that looks like, but then students, you know, everybody's unique and they find different ways to excel and different ways to struggle that we don't end up capturing in our rubrics. And I don't know about you, but that's been a problem for me at times. Oh, that's a good question. You know, I haven't seen a lot of conversation on this, but I feel like it would actually work at any grade. I used it in high school. But I think in some ways it actually makes almost more even, well, at least as much sense with younger learners, where we're going to define for them what meeting the standard looks like. And they don't have to have so much language about exceeding or not yet meeting. On the flip side, I think there might still be some value to, even if there is only a single point rubric, having some models or examples of what meeting looks like in student kind of written terms, and then what exceeding looks like versus what not quite meeting looks like, without having to go into detail in terms of every way that a student might exceed or might not quite meet the standards. They would probably benefit from some models of all three, if that makes sense. But I actually think a single point rubric is great for all grades when they hit that point that they're doing projects that are graded with a rubric. I think it might actually be easier to understand for learners in many ways. Be careful in our online setting. It's really hard to know what we're actually seeing from assessment. You know, when they came into our classes, we had a lot more control over a lot of things. Some teachers were using GoGuardian. You could lock down the browsers. You could do assessments where they could only handwrite, nothing else was on their desk, you know, and depending on what was important to the teacher in terms of whether or not the students could consult other resources or not. We don't have that right now. We just don't. And we have to keep that in mind in terms of when we're evaluating student work. And in some cases, students are having grades at the high school level and others are doing credit, no credit, which is the opt-in version. It's hard to know what their responses are really telling us. We don't know if they had one device only, even if we did lock it down. We can lock down the managed Chromebooks on GoGuardian, but not all our students are using managed Chromebooks. And even if they are, we don't know that there's not another device in the home that they can access, even if we did lock it down. We don't know if they were able to open other tabs. So even if you know, again, if you try to have them be locked into a tab on a Chromebook, we don't know that they didn't open another tab because you can't really lock them down. We don't know if they were able to contact other people and get information. So that's added a whole crux of complexity to assessments and writing assessments that really tell us what we need to know so that we can evaluate their learning and report their progress when it's hard to know. That's where it comes back to, unfortunately, it's really hard for that to work successfully with multiple choice. Obviously, we're still going to have some multiple choice components in our assessments, but it's going to be challenging for you to really know if they knew the information or not, even more than it was when they were in our classrooms. If we can have open-ended tasks that are somehow personalized and that don't lend themselves to Googling. So if you have students create an infographic that synthesizes their understanding of, you know, the content of the 4 lessons that were in their science chapter, there's not going to be an infographic online for that. So that open-ended task is going to be difficult for them to Google. And it will give you a lot more information. That does not make it easier to grade, because nothing open-ended is easier to grade. Clearly, automatic grading is going to be the easiest. But a rubric will help you in that sense, but it's just something to be aware of. Like, we don't want to kid ourselves. If we're going to make choices, we also need to understand the ins and outs of those choices and what those choices really mean and say. Yeah. So the cheating could happen. So I was kind of leading to. So something else to consider is, if you're starting to suspect that there's some cheating happening, why are they cheating? And also exactly how are they cheating can help inform us as to maybe what we can do in our task to help alleviate or mitigate that going forward. Having a clear understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because sometimes they're doing it because they just don't think they have the skill to do the task. So take a look at the assessment itself. Is there a chance that when they saw the task and it said, you know, now you're going to write, you know, for our assessment, you're going to write a 3-paragraph essay, and nowhere in their practice did they ever have to write even the first, like the 3 paragraphs separately and get feedback on them. But so this task to write this essay came out of nowhere. They might have said, that's overwhelming. I don't know how to do it. I'm going to start Googling things. So could the assessment be broken down into micro tasks? Was it ongoing, meaning that there were opportunities for them to try all the components of the assessment leading up to it and get feedback, so that by the time it happened, they were like, oh, this is what we've been doing all along. I got this. I know what to do. I know what I've done before. I know what part of it worked and what part didn't work, and I know how to move forward. Or does it feel like this one-time thing that kind of hit them like a ton of bricks and was very different from anything they had done leading up to it in that lesson sequence? So I already alluded to this, but did the students have an opportunity to get feedback on these skills and the precise way in which those skills would be measured leading up to the assessment? I mean, did they have opportunities to practice and get feedback? Did they have opportunities to reflect themselves? We talked a little bit earlier about feedback and making sure self-assessment and reflection was part of it, where they actually check on their own work with the standards or the learning targets over the course of a lesson before they get assessed. If there is a concern about the use of online tools, consider building it into the rubric. And actually, I heard a really great way to do this today in that assessment webinar, where you could actually have an aspect of the rubric that says, I can use and cite online tools appropriately and as needed. So that it's like, okay, we're going to acknowledge you might have used some online tools, but it says right here in the rubric that you're going to use them appropriately and you're going to cite them and you're only going to use them as needed. It's just something to consider. That may not work for everybody, but something to consider. And that brings us to the end. So I'm going to